That morning, the cold air in Dublin felt different. The sky was filled with fog, and a light drizzle fell on the streets. But in one corner of the city, where the Dunston Bank stood, the atmosphere was anything but calm. It was chaotic. Crowds of people had gathered on both sides of the road. The blue and red police lights kept flashing. Reporters ran around with their cameras, and one question was written on every face. What happened here? Someone said there had been a robbery during the night. Another whispered that the vault was gone. Someone else murmured that everything inside had been emptied out. When the police finally stepped inside the bank, what they saw took their breath away. The vault door was open, but the lock wasn't broken. The lockers were open too, but there were no signs of forced entry. No gunshots, no alarms, and yet about $38 million, roughly 315 crore rupees, had mysteriously vanished. Inside the bank, there was silence. The manager sat against a wall, his face completely pale. His eyes were full of fear and guilt, and he kept repeating one thing again and again. They said if I didn't open the vault, my family. The police officers looked at each other silently. None of them spoke. One officer bent down and carefully examined the inside of the vault. Everything looked perfectly clean, as if someone had performed a surgical operation. On the floor there were faint marks, traces of gloves. The CCTV footage was checked, but 2 hours from the middle of the night were missing. When the footage resumed, it showed only a white van, with no number plate. Dublin's TV channels were flooded with the news. Ireland's biggest bank robbery, and not a single sound. A reporter leaned toward the camera and said, "This isn't a movie, folks. This is real." Millions have disappeared, as if they dissolved into thin air. The bank staff were in shock. No one was talking. Some people were checking their lockers. Inside there was nothing but emptiness. Someone's entire life savings, someone's wedding jewelry, someone's hard-earned money, all gone. By evening the police had sealed off the entire building. Forensic teams were working inside. Near the vault, they found an access card with the bank's logo. But when they scanned it, the screen showed invalid ID. Someone had duplicated the bank's internal system. One of the officers inside said, "No forced entry, no alarm, no clue." This wasn't just a robbery, it was a plan. Outside the rain had started again. The yellow police tape fluttered in the wind. Camera flashes flickered through the drizzle. People slowly began to leave, but the question on their faces remained the same. If no one broke the door, if no one cut the lock, then how did the money disappear? Night was approaching. A yellow streetlight glowed over the bank. A senior officer stepped out, adjusted the collar of his coat, and quietly said, "This isn't the work of some petty thief. This is the game of a mastermind." That night, the Dublin sky felt heavy. In the distance, the sound of sirens echoed again, and the cold walls of Dunston Bank stood silent, holding within them a secret that had unsettled all of Ireland. By 7, the crowd gathered outside Dunston Bank only knew one thing: that just hours ago, the biggest heist in Ireland's history had taken place, and the police had no clue who did it. The people behind it hadn't taken months to prepare. Only a few days, but each day felt like an army working on a war plan. 3 days earlier, in an old warehouse in Dublin, a group of people had gathered. The paint on the door was peeling, the windows were covered in dust, and the air inside smelled of coffee and paper. That was their safe house, their workshop, their rehearsal space. On the table were spread out maps. Every window, every security camera, every vending machine, and every trash bin of Dunston Bank was marked in detail. Even the pillars beside the bank, the width of the stairs, and the height of the nearby streetlights were all measured down to the meter. Someone had drawn a timeline with a pencil, when each security shift changed, when the rounds were done, and when the lobby stayed empty. They had smooth, well-practiced recordings of their drills. From CCTV screenshots, they had made small notes, how much area each camera covered, when glare appeared, and where the blind spots were. Some tiny flaws in the camera framing, things no ordinary person would ever notice. These people did, especially one man who marked the maps with extraordinary precision. They called him Antonio. His eyes were cold and sharp, like a mathematician. He had extracted the bank staff's shift schedules from the official site, noted the cleaning crew's entry and exit times, and prepared a table of delivery schedules. It seemed as if the entire daily routine of the bank lay open before them. They weren't just observing from outside. Some team members had been sitting in cafes near the bank for months, watching. They knew when the manager came for lunch, where he parked his car at night, and which gate had the weakest security. Once they even created fake delivery company IDs, and used that excuse to test a delivery drop point near the bank's outer gate, so that later a truck could come without suspicion. They had technology too. One man spent days and nights studying the CCTV recording times and maintenance log. He discovered that every Wednesday morning, the CCTV recorder automatically rebooted for just 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes became the heart of their plan. They built their entire strategy around that single reboot. The tone of their discussions was always calm. No shouting, no chaos. Every step was rehearsed. They even practiced opening a fake vault inside the warehouse. Using wooden boxes filled with fake currency, they timed how much money 2 people could move in 20. They didn't rehearse digging or breaking anything, but they did multiple trial runs of their escape route through narrow alleys and service lanes, using that same white van with removable number plates. Meanwhile, the paperwork was being handled too. A couple of people were creating fake IDs, duplicate access cards, and forged authorization letters. The magnetic stripes on the cards were encoded so that if scanned, they would show as valid. They knew the locks weren't the only thing to bypass. They had to deceive the logic of the system itself. Their idea was simple. If you make the system trust you enough to verify you, then no external mechanism can expose you. So they even copied the bank's internal procedures, fake maintenance requests, forged emails, and a bogus third-party audit notice, which would justify the CCTV reboot and hide their real activity. Every person's role was clear. Some were assigned to the vault area, others to create outside diversions. A small group handled communications and tech, managing radio frequencies and phone. One man was tasked with pretending there was a medical emergency, to draw employees out of the nearby cafe and reduce the number of people near the lobby. But their greatest weapon was time. For 3 days they observed every minute behavior of the bank, and from that data, they identified the perfect window. They controlled every move, every pause, every second. Antonio had an unusual calmness. No drama, no arrogance, just calculation and discipline. There was no noise, no threat. Everything was silent and precise. From the outside, anyone watching would think it was just a routine delivery operation. After the final rehearsal that night, they quietly split up into their rooms. Some checked their clothes carefully. Gloves, non-reflective shoes, blackout masks. Others folded the last copies of the map. A few stood near the window, looking out into the quiet alley, where the cold morning air seemed to hide nothing. But that emptiness itself marked the beginning of their success. After 3 days of such meticulous preparation, they were ready to enter a bank without breaking a door or setting off an alarm, relying only on their understanding, their patience, and perfect timing. They didn't break the locks or the doors. They had mapped every weakness in the system. The night was deep and silent. The narrow streets of Dublin slept under their own weight. A few cars passed slowly, and the city lights glowed softly like mushrooms in the mist. But in that calmness, some people's lives were about to change forever. Liam O'Connor, the manager of Dunston Bank, sat in his small kitchen with his family. The warm smell of soup filled the air, and his daughter sat with her notebook, scribbling something. His wife smiled gently and said, "You have a meeting at the bank tomorrow. Don't forget to leave on time." Liam nodded without concern. Work was stressful, yes, but everything seemed normal. He had no idea that by the next morning, his entire world would change. Around 10:30 that night, someone knocked on the door. Liam looked out the window and saw 2 men standing there. They said they were from the head office and needed his signature on some important papers. Thinking it was something routine, Liam opened the door. What happened next was sudden and terrifyingly quiet. No screams, no violence, just silence. It was just a soft line of words, but beneath it, there was hidden pressure. The men's voices carried calm assurance, but their eyes were cold. They said, "We won't hurt your family. We just need your help." Fear began to spread across Liam's face. They told him to sit on a chair and showed him the papers they had brought, blueprints of the bank, vault code shifts, and details of the security system. One of them said quietly, "You know this system better than anyone. Just open a small way for us, and we'll handle the rest." Liam's voice trembled as he asked, "What if I refuse?" The man smiled faintly and said, "We know what your family means to you." They didn't threaten him with violence. Instead, they picked up the photos from the table, Pictures of Liam's wife, his daughter, and scenes from inside his home. The moment Liam saw them, his heartbeat quickened. He had no time to think. On one side was the safety of his family, on the other was his honesty. Finally he took a deep breath and said softly, "All right, I'll do it." They gave him precise instructions, which door to use, when to enter the codes, and what to say to no one. They told him that during the night, there would be a short window when the CCTV system reset itself for a few minutes. That was when they had to act. Sweat shone on Liam's forehead. He asked, "What if something goes wrong?" The reply came calmly, "No mistakes are acceptable. Stay quiet." The clock kept ticking, and sleep was gone from Liam's eyes. He peeked into his daughter's room. She was fast asleep. He touched his wife's forehead gently and whispered, "I'll be back. This will pass." Then he took his car keys and drove toward the bank. Outside, a light rain had started. The streets were empty and silent. When he reached the bank, everything appeared normal. The security guard inside was making coffee. Liam scanned his card and entered. A few minutes later, the two men arrived through the back gate. Their voices were calm as before, but there was a heavy pressure hidden inside that calmness. They asked Liam to show them the way to the vault. With trembling fingers, Liam typed the password into the computer. With every keystroke, his hand grew tighter and stiff. "This is the last time," he whispered. One of the men replied, "That's all we need." In the next few moments, everything happened smoothly. No breaking, no noise, no chaos. The system was unlocked. Stacks of cash were neatly separated. Copies of important records were taken. Outside, the same white van that had been seen days earlier was waiting. As soon as the job was done, they told Liam, "Go home. Act as if nothing happened." Liam drove back. The whole way he felt as if someone was watching him at every corner. He quietly opened the door of his home. His wife and daughter were still asleep. He looked into the mirror and saw a man who had spent years protecting the bank's honor, but now carried a secret that would never leave him. By morning light, he had become part of history. But for Liam, this day had changed his life forever. One act of fear, one decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. No one knew whether what he did was out of fear or helplessness. But one thing was certain. The real key to that night's crime was not in machines, but in the fear of a man's heart. The night was dark and deep. Behind the Dunston Bank building, a black van slowly stopped. Its silence made the stillness even heavier, as if the entire city had gone quiet and only the faint breath of that building remained alive. The van's door opened, and a few men stepped out. Their faces were covered, their clothes plain, and in their hands were small bags. They exchanged short, silent glances. Without speaking a word, they began to move. Their steps were so perfectly synchronized that it seemed like a choreographed dance rehearsal. They moved quietly. No pushing, no sound. The lighting had been chosen carefully. Even their shoes didn't make a sound on the floor. The service door at the back of the bank was locked. It only opened during the morning routine. Their eyes were fixed on that daily movement, as if they knew exactly which moment would open their path. Once inside, everyone took their positions. Some went near the counters, some entered different rooms, and a few stood by the vault. No one was nervous. Their movements carried calm focus and quiet confidence. Inside the bank, staff were working as usual. The cameras moved in their normal scanning pattern. Then with one subtle signal, everything changed. A faint sound drew the staff's attention, and for a few minutes, it felt as if time itself had stopped. But it wasn't panic. It was a rehearsed pause. The men didn't yell or threaten anyone. They kept their voices natural, as if everything was ordinary. But their eyes told a different story. This was no chaos. It was precision. There were no screams, no violence. Within minutes, the vault door opened, and everything inside was suddenly within their reach. Stacks of notes were arranged in perfect order. The thieves moved swiftly, but silently. They worked with the calm efficiency of machines, packing the money, bag after bag, with cold precision. If someone had looked through a window at that moment, they would have thought it was a practice drill. But it wasn't practice. It was the real thing. They knew time was against them, yet each one worked so sharply in their role that the entire operation was done in minutes. Outside, the black van stood ready. The bags were loaded. The door closed. They left as quietly as they had arrived. Once outside, they split up, taking different routes to confuse anyone who might be watching. Their exit was so clean that by morning, when people discovered what had happened, it felt as if the entire event had vanished into thin air. When the bank opened, everyone was shocked by what they saw. Those who thought some traces would be left were astonished. Almost everything was gone, neatly and completely. A few paper trails, a few scattered documents, and the faint marks of where the bags had been, but no violence, no chaos, only emptiness, only disbelief. People started realizing this wasn't just a robbery. It was a master plan executed with perfection. They weren't noisy thieves or violent men. They were calm, calculated professionals. The silence they left behind spoke of something much bigger. Detectives came and inspected the vault area. Everything was methodically cleared. Only a thin layer of dust remained, with no signs of struggle, no marks of forced entry. It was clear this had been done quickly and expertly. The media began calling it a surgical operation, because that's exactly what it looked like. No explosions, no high-tech equipment, just a group of people who executed their roles so perfectly that everything was over in minutes. And that was what shocked everyone the most. How could such a huge amount of money disappear so silently? Some said it was an inside job. Others wrote that a bank employee must have helped. A few claimed it was the work of a powerful gang with its own system. But the truth was, what looked simple from the outside was far more complex within. While the police and forensic teams collected evidence, rumors spread across the city. People began making their own versions of what had really happened. People were talking in their own way, making up their own versions of the story. Some said the thieves were sophisticated and elegant. Others claimed they left their mark on the bank, just to make headlines in newspapers. And as the days passed, the investigators only found more and more questions. How did they get in? How did they escape? Who helped them? The answers were lost in the dark. But one was clear. What happened inside Dunston Bank that night wasn't just a robbery. It was an art, executed in silence, and vanished in silence. The night had passed. The cold morning in Dublin carried an eerie stillness, like the calm that follows a storm. But the city was anything but calm. Sirens were wailing everywhere. Police cars sped through the streets. Helicopters hovered above. Outside Dunston Bank, a huge crowd had gathered, and everyone had the same question on their lips. What happened here? Who did this? How did so much money disappear without a sound? Media vans were parked in front of the bank. Cameras were rolling. Reporters were shouting live updates. "We are standing right outside Dunston Bank," one reporter said, "where last night the biggest bank robbery in history took place. Nearly 315 crore rupees, about $38 million vanished overnight, and police still have no solid leads." Inside the bank, investigators were searching every corner. Near the vault, they found fingerprints, dust, and shoe prints, but nothing that looked accidental. It seemed as if someone had deliberately made sure not to leave any real evidence behind. This wasn't the work of amateurs. It was a highly professional operation. Police set up roadblocks across the city. Every exit was checked, every white van was stopped, but there was no result. The van seen on CCTV had simply disappeared into thin air. Airport authorities were alert. Extra checks were carried out on flights and cargo trucks. Every container at the port was scanned, but nothing. The thieves had vanished completely. The atmosphere in the city slowly turned to madness. Every news channel had only one headline: Ireland's biggest robbery. A 38 million mystery shakes Dublin. Newspapers printed bold letters: "This is not just a robbery, it's a national embarrassment." Questions were raised about the government, about bank security, about the country's reputation. Parliament held debates. People were asking if an entire vault could disappear. How safe was the common man's money? At Dublin Police Headquarters, an emergency meeting was called. Top officers, bank representatives, and government officials were all present. One officer slammed his hand on the table in anger. Who carried out such a massive operation without making a sound? Where were our cameras, alarms, and guards? He shouted. Someone spoke softly. Sometimes the biggest crime isn't done with a gun, it's done with the mind. The room went silent. People across the city were now living in fear. Everyone was checking their bank accounts, inspecting their lockers. Some even began withdrawing their savings. If this could happen to Dunston Bank, Where was anyone's money safe? Outside the bank, a woman stood with her son, tears in her eyes. "My husband's entire life savings were here," she said. "Now no one has any answers. They didn't break the locks, but they broke our trust." The media turned the story into pure sensation. Some channels claimed it was the work of an international crime syndicate. Others said it was an inside job, but no one had proof. Theories flooded newsrooms. Some said the thieves dug a secret tunnel to the vault. Others suggested digital manipulation. Some even claimed a technical genius was behind it all. Interpol was immediately informed. Within hours, the Dublin case became an international investigation. Help was requested from financial crime units in Switzerland, France, and the UK, but everyone came up empty-handed. Investigators examined bank records and transaction histories. No digital footprints. Phone lines were traced. No unusual calls. Vault entry logs were all valid. It was as if someone had infiltrated the entire security system and erased every trace. By evening, hundreds of people had gathered outside the bank, faces filled with anger, questions, and frustration. A man shouted, "If this was a robbery, someone inside must have opened the door." Another yelled, "Our money is gone, but who's really responsible?" Police had to control the crowd. Media cameras above the building kept flashing the same headline, "The perfect robbery." No guns, no alarms, no clues. The air of the city now carried a strange mix of fear and fascination. Some people spoke about it like a movie story. The elderly warned their children that no place was safe anymore. By night, social media and radio were filled with one name, the Dunston heist. It was no longer just an incident. It had become a symbol of the quietest yet most shocking robbery of modern time. The next morning, newspaper headlines screamed, "They didn't steal from the bank. They stole the bank itself," and beneath it, "Ireland wakes up to a mystery it cannot explain." Dublin nights were never the same again. Every sound felt suspicious. Every white van drew attention, and the walls of Dunston Bank still seemed to whisper the silence of that night, when someone took 315 crore rupees and disappeared without a word or a trace. The following days, newspapers called it not just a robbery, but a national embarrassment. As the investigation deepened, the case became even more complicated. In the early days, police questioned dozens of people, local residents, bank employees, even known criminals. Everyone tried to appear innocent, yet every story seemed to hide something. The first theory was that it was an inside job. Someone said a bank employee might be the mastermind, someone who knew the layout, the security, and the schedules perfectly. For such a person, planning the robbery was easy, and executing it even easier. Some clues even pointed in that direction: misplaced keys, altered security logs, and records that only insiders could access. But other rumors soon spread. People said this wasn't just local cunning. Its threads might reach all the way to London. Intelligence agencies received anonymous tips, hinting that an international network could be involved, maybe a shadow figure from a foreign mafia or smuggling ring. Every theory sounded convincing, but the evidence was weak. Forensic teams started collecting every possible clue: fingerprints, DNA, handwriting comparisons, surveillance footage. But each time, new mysteries appeared. Some fingerprints matched old criminal records. Some footage was too blurry to identify anyone. Stranger still, some evidence seemed to have been deliberately tampered with. Someone had tried to erase fingerprints. Some CCTV footage was edited or cut. It was clear. The thief didn't just want to steal. He wanted to prove he was untouchable. Investigators began watching people who regularly visited the bank. Everyone looked normal in their daily routines. But was anyone truly innocent? Even the smallest clue could lead straight to the culprit. As the days went by, different theories continued to emerge. The first claim, it was an inside job by a bank employee or ex-employee. The second, an organized international gang that had committed large-scale robberies before. The third, a hybrid operation, a mix of local insiders and foreign network. Every theory had logic, and every theory had flaws. The detective team exhausted every possible angle, but found no final conclusion. The media turned the case into a national spectacle. Newspapers and channels ran headlines like the city's biggest mystery, insider or international. Who really pulled the strings? Fear and curiosity spread through the people. Everyone was guessing who the real criminal was, and what the next move might be. Meanwhile, anonymous tip-offs kept confusing things. Sometimes a hidden package was found at night. Sometimes a warning call came through. Police stayed alert, but each new clue led to new uncertainty. Once, a tip even claimed that the next target had already been chosen. Police grew even more cautious, though no one knew if it was a bluff or a real threat. Investigators began to feel lost. Some suspects confessed, then took back their statements. Some witnesses stayed silent out of fear. Every corner hid a mystery. Every clue opened a new question. As the days passed, the case became a puzzle even for the investigators. It seemed as though the mastermind had thought through every move in advance, from digging tunnels to manipulating evidence. This wasn't just a robbery. It was a challenge to the law itself. Some said it was clearly an inside job. Others insisted its strings led to London, a web of international criminals. But what was the truth? Who would finally uncover the layers of this mystery? It remained unsolved. Each day, detectives found new clues and new questions. Sometimes it felt like the answer was just within reach. Other times, the whole puzzle seemed more tangled than before. This confusion, this suspense, it made the case even more fascinating and haunting. Years went by. The memory of that night still lingered in the city. But as time passed, the details began to fade. Some people were caught. A few minor players confessed to small roles, but the real mastermind, the one who planned every step, erased every trace, and controlled everything, remained hidden in darkness. The bank employees who were once seen as innocent now faced new struggles. Many lived with guilt and sleepless nights. They never imagined their small mistakes would become part of such a massive story. The families affected during the investigation were changed forever. Fear and suspicion filled homes. Relationships cracked. Trust was broken. People started looking at everything with doubt. Sometimes a bank employee suspected his colleague. Sometimes a neighbor doubted his neighbor. An unspoken tension hung over the city. The media didn't let go either. Every year, on the anniversary of the heist, newspapers reprinted old headlines. The city's greatest heist. Who was behind it? Mastermind still at large. The headlines may have faded, but their echo remained in people's minds. The guilt of the bank managers and security staff was no secret either. Many nights, they couldn't sleep thinking, if only we'd been more careful, if only we hadn't made that one small mistake. They lost not just their careers, but their dignity and their families' trust. The people of the city still remember that night. Some tell it as a story. For others, it became a warning that trust is fragile, and sometimes the biggest theft isn't of money, but of faith. The unseen mastermind proved that intelligence could be a weapon. He showed that even the best security could be defeated with patience, planning, and precision. But the deepest impact was not on the bank. It was on the hearts of people. The fear, the uncertainty, the endless question, who was really responsible? Some investigators believed the mastermind hid his identity so carefully that no one would ever catch him. Others thought he only sought the thrill of the crime, and though the thrill had ended, his mystery would live forever. The incident changed the city's mindset. People became more alert, more cautious. They learned that trust was fragile, and its price could be higher than money. Every security check, every precaution became part of life. Time moved on. Memories faded, but the story never truly ended. For every new detective, journalist, or citizen, it remained an unsolved mystery. A lesson that crime isn't just about money or valuables, but about human psychology, trust, and greed. And perhaps that was the biggest lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest theft isn't of money, it's of trust. Years later, the mastermind remained unknown, elusive, always one step ahead, a legend, living in the shadows of the city's history. The people moved on, banks reopened, employees rebuilt their lives, but that night, that robbery, and that mastermind, they still live in memory. And sometimes when people remember, they still whisper the same line. Sometimes the biggest theft isn't of money, it's of trust, and that unsolved mystery will forever live as a legend in the city's history.